All right, man, peace. So those of you brothers that follow the NBA, you know that one of the most incessant debate points is Michael Jordan versus LeBron James. And oftentimes, over the course of trying to create a dynamic of supremacy for LeBron James over Michael Jordan, many of the NBA pundits on television, or even many of the woke followers of the NBA who love LeBron James, they'll state that, well, Jordan was not successful in the playoffs early in his career. Well, people who understand what they were watching, you know that due to Jordan's style of play, which was very different in the NBA circles, they had never seen a wing player who was that dominant, at least not since Elgin Baylor and Jerry West in regards to scoring. And the NBA at that time, normally the championship level teams had 3 to 4 Hall of Famers on those teams. When you look at the Boston Celtics, they had Bird, McHale, Parrish, Dennis Johnson. The LA Lakers, of course, they had Magic Johnson, Kareem, James Worthy, Bob McAdoo, so on and so forth. The Philadelphia 76ers, of course, they had the great Julius Erving, Moses Malone, Maurice Cheeks, Andrew Toney, who was trending towards being a Hall of Famer until he broke his foot, Bobby Jones, so on and so forth. Point being is this: in order to win championships in the 80s, you basically had to have a super team. So when you see many of these people engaging in these LeBron James versus Michael Jordan debates, and they'll state that Jordan's playoff record was 1-9 before he got Scottie Pippen, they're being disingenuous, because you have to understand what the overall paradigm for winning was back then. You had to have a team filled with Hall of Famers. Even the Detroit Pistons in the mid to late 80s who rose to prominence, they had Isaiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, Adrian Dantley, Dennis Rodman, Bill Laimbeer, Mark Aguirre. All those players are or should be in the Hall of Fame. Why am I saying this? Because one of the main ways that you could gauge Jordan's potency as an overall player is based off of how well he fared with other talented players against elite level talent. And one of the main examples for that was prior to the 1984 Olympic Games, when he took the 1984 Olympic team with great players like Patrick Ewing and Chris Mullin, still in college, but they were able to perform exceptionally well against the NBA's elite. They had a series of games that they played against the best of the best in the NBA. I believe they played 9 games, and the 1984 Olympic team was 9-0 against an NBA team that fielded Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, Alex English, Larry Bird. I believe Mark Aguirre was there. I can't quite remember. Walter Davis was there. And the U.S. Olympic team led by Michael Jordan was 9-0. So it proves that whenever he had talent, he knew how to make his teammates better. So anyway, they're going to talk about a little situation that happened between Michael Jordan and Bobby Knight, the head coach of the 1984 Olympic basketball team. And of course, I'm going to chime in.
And of course, no book about basketball is complete without one Mr. Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And yet, guess who did not talk to you for this book? Right. What was that about?
Well, I'm not really sure because
Well, we know what that's about. Michael Jordan has a 10-part documentary that's going to be airing on Netflix next year. And even beyond that, Jordan has always been known as someone who knows his worth, and he's not going to let anyone make a buck off of his name unless he's getting a piece. He's always been known as that person. So it is what it is.
Dan was in charge of the interviews. He does have his own
He has a
documentary.
competing documentary,
Sure.
so that's quite good. Well, what was it like for you, though, to deal with that? And we're showing, by the way, people going, why are you showing Bobby Knight? Because there's amazing stories about Michael Jordan and Bobby Knight, whether you even wanted him on the Olympic team.
So the 1984 Olympics, Billy Packer tells the story. He's friends with Bob Knight in the college game. And Bob Knight comes to him and says, you know what? I'm stuck here. I don't want Jordan. He can't shoot. What can I do with a two-guard who can't shoot?
Let me also say this. One of the main reasons why Bob Knight was kind of against having Michael Jordan on his team was because in the NCAA tournament in 1984, the Indiana Hoosiers were the team that knocked North Carolina out of the playoffs, if I remember correctly. And one of the ways in which they were able to knock them out of the playoffs was to put Jordan in awkward positions on the basketball floor. At that particular time, the scouting report on Jordan was make him take mid-range and long-range jumpers, because if you let him get into the lane, he's going to finish. He's going to dunk over your whole team. That's going to raise the morale of his teammates. So the scouting report on him was to make him shoot, double team him, make him pass out of double teams, make him go left, things of that nature. So coming off of the Indiana Hoosiers' success against North Carolina in the NCAA tournament in 1984, it doesn't surprise me that Bob Knight may have felt a certain way about Michael Jordan.
I'm sorry, can you just say that again?
I'm afraid to say it again, unless someone attributed it to me.
Right.
But this was Bob Knight, the coach of the 1984 men's Olympic team, saying that he didn't want Michael Jordan on his team. And so,
Bob Knight did not want a lot of guys on his team. He didn't want Charles Barkley on the team either. And he was successful in not having Charles Barkley on the team because Bob Knight was able to accurately appraise Charles Barkley for being a me-first player and not having the best work ethic. You know, it's funny, I just came across an article, I believe online, that I read from Jason Williams. For those of you who remember, Jason Williams, spelled Jayson. He was a great rebounder for the New Jersey Nets all throughout the mid to late 90s. And he was conveying some NBA stories about Michael Jordan, also about Charles Barkley. Jason Williams was a rookie, I believe, in the 1990-91 season, somewhere around there. And he stated that he knew that Charles Barkley was never going to win a championship because Charles Barkley would show up to practice late with hamburgers and fries and pancakes from McDonald's, and he would barely practice with the team. Now, if you let Charles Barkley tell it, he'll claim to be one of the hardest workers in the history of the NBA. But anybody could tell that he was not that hard of a worker because he did not give great effort on the defensive end. And Charles was one of the most naturally gifted players in the history of the NBA. That is why Scottie Pippen loves to relate the story that before he signed with the Rockets in 1998, Michael Jordan told him, don't sign with them because Charles Barkley is never going to win. He's a loser. He does not work hard enough. He's never going to win. That's what Scottie Pippen says Michael Jordan told him. But just to get back to the point, there were a lot of players that Bob Knight did not want on his team because I think that he had a preconceived notion in his mind about how he wanted to play, or at least how he wanted his team to play, I should say.
But he has to have him. He's the best player in the country. So, and then as their preparation continues, he keeps checking in with Billy Packer. And after a little while, they go through some practice. He's like, hey, this guy really works hard. He's a competitor, you know.
Yeah, Jordan, he can do something.
He's a fox.
Yeah, because he saw how hard Jordan played on defense. When you're that talented and then you play as hard on defense as Jordan played, he's going to win the respect of every coach very quickly.
Foxhole guy, I'd go to war with him. Okay, still not the most skilled guy I want, but still. And then as they go on, eventually this team plays a 9-game exhibition tour against NBA selections. Goes 9-0, a college team. Imagine that today. It's impossible.
Absolutely. And those games, at least most of those games, are still on YouTube. Once again, that U.S. Olympic team, they went 9-0 against the best players in the NBA. If that was done today, imagine if you had the best college players and they were representing the United States in the Olympics for basketball, and they played against the best players in the NBA and they went 9-0. The best player on that college team will automatically be considered a legend.
Goes 9-0 against the likes of Larry Bird, Isaiah Thomas were on those teams. And by the end of that tour, he goes to...
Now, Isaiah Thomas relayed a story, I believe, on one of those open court shows on NBA TV, where he stated that before one of those games between the NBA All-Stars and the United States 1984 Olympic basketball team, he looked down at the other end of the court and he saw the 1984 team warming up. And of course, they were going in for their layups, their dunks, and then he saw Jordan going for his layups and his dunks, and he said he just looked different. The way he moved, the way he jumped was different. And he went over to talk to Bobby Knight about it, and Bobby Knight told him, yeah, he's different than any other player that I've ever seen before. Isaiah Thomas was relaying that before one of those games in 1984. And, you know, not to digress, but as I've already touched on in other videos, there are a lot of reasons why Jordan and Isaiah Thomas had the issues that they had. There were a lot of jealousy issues. Also, keep in mind that there was a rivalry between Indiana and North Carolina back in the late 70s, early 1980s. Isaiah Thomas and the Indiana Hoosiers had knocked North Carolina out of the NCAA tournament the year before Jordan got there in 1981. They were able to knock out the North Carolina Tar Heels led by James Worthy. And then, of course, Isaiah Thomas declares for the draft early. The next year, Jordan comes in as a freshman and they win the championship against Patrick Ewing and the Georgetown Hoyas. Then when Jordan gets drafted in 1984 by the team that Isaiah Thomas wanted to be drafted by, the Chicago Bulls, he quickly takes over the town. They forget about Isaiah Thomas, and that makes Isaiah Thomas even more upset. And then the Pistons rise to supremacy, and they're the ones keeping down the Bulls. So there were a lot of dynamics that were at work there between Jordan and Isaiah Thomas.
Bob Knight goes to Billy Packer and he says, "This guy is going to be the greatest player of all time."
That's an assessment right there.
There it is.
And there's also stuff about Michael Jordan.
Absolutely. And Bob Knight is also known for telling one of his friends, I believe the coach or the GM for the Portland Trail Blazers, when they told him that they were going to draft Sam Bowie because we need a center. Of course, the famous story goes Bob Knight told the GM or the coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, he said, "Well, play Jordan at center."
Jordan, at the end of his career, I was in Washington when there, so the relationship with him and Doug Collins was always fascinating, and how Michael dealt with sort of aging in the game, especially when so.
It was fascinating because Michael Jordan dealt with Doug Collins like how a guy would if he had to sit next to his ex-girlfriend on a plane. Like, I have to tolerate sitting down next to this broad for the next 3 hours. I had no idea that she was going to be here. That's what Jordan was like dealing with Doug Collins. Because Michael Jordan and Doug Collins, they had an up and down relationship because Doug Collins was so emotional. Like, Doug Collins was totally out of control when it came to his emotions. He was so up and down. When they would win big games, he'd cry. When they lost big games, he'd cry. And that was one of the things that Jordan was so thankful about when it came to Phil Jackson, was that Phil Jackson was much more even keeled. So when Jordan went on to play for the Wizards, he actually was an advocate for Doug Collins becoming the coach of that team because at least he knew Doug Collins, but he still had to deal with his emotional ups and downs.
When so many people didn't think he should have been playing again to begin with.
And you and I were two of them.
Yes.
Right, but you guys had no idea why he was playing. It was all business.
What do you detail?
Well, so one of the
more
poignant moments, I think, in Michael Jordan's career probably was at the end of his tenure in Washington. He had a streak of consecutive games where he had 10 points or more. This is not shocking to Michael Jordan fans. But then there's a game where he has 8 points, and it's the end of a blowout, and Doug Collins takes him out. And probably...
Now, had that been LeBron James, LeBron would have said, "Wait a minute, let me get 2 more points."
If he could do that over, he would probably change his mind. And Jordan went to him and said, do you think I can't play anymore? And Doug's like, no, I just thought this, blah, blah, blah. Well, so you know what happens next. You know, Jordan goes off for 50-something in the next game, and he said, and right before that game, Jordan said to him, "So just look at me. I'll tell you when I'm coming out." And so Collins is looking at him, he's like, "Nope, I'm good. I'm good." So that's, to me, Michael Jordan at his best, even at the end of his career.
And Scottie Pippen, too. We have him on.
And once again, the only reason why Michael Jordan came back was because he had an under-the-table deal with David Stern to try to help the NBA. In exchange for helping the NBA, whose ratings were going down, they were going to assist him in becoming the new owner of the Washington Wizards. And of course, David Stern and Abe Pollin stabbed him in the back, and Jordan drove off in a rage. That's why David Stern appeased him later on by hooking him up with Bob Johnson. That's how Jordan became the owner of the Charlotte Hornets, or at the time, I believe they were known as the Charlotte Bobcats. But there's a lot of racial dynamics that go on in the NBA as well. They try to act like the NBA is this racially conscious, woke league. All that is bullshit. The owners in the NBA are just as racist as the NFL. But anyway, peace.